Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. Now, very shortly, I'm going to be running the finale of my Sapphire Island Dungeon World mini campaign, which some of you may have seen detailed in my written blog. I'll stick a link down below to some of those entries in case you're interested. And we're coming up to the final session, the 10th session. And basically the situation we've got at the moment is the mainland has been completely overrun by the villainous forces of a creature now believed to be a demonically possessed elf known as the Child, or the Black Hand. And he has recruited a half-demented orc shaman and has used his foul magics to also bring in the Emperor of the Sapphire Islands. And each of them has created a form of soldier. Effectively, the orc shaman has bred Norsemen and orcs who normally live together in tribes. He's bred them together into one sort of Uruk-hai style species with the versatility of men and their abilities and the brute raw strength of orcs. The Child himself has bred goblins with elven blood to create a species of dark elf, or grey elf as they're called in the setting, whereas the Emperor of the Sapphire Islands, in return for his joining with this dark trio, the villains of the piece, has been given the knowledge of how to meld the sapphires of his island with some of his most loyal warriors, creating a race of almost golem-like crystalline creatures. And these three fingers of the Dark Hand have converged on the mainland and have all but crushed all of the resistance from the main kingdom. In the meantime, our three heroes, a Norse outcast who has returned to his home to claim the kingship, Strike, has, through a marriage of convenience to an orc chieftain, has melded together these orc tribes under his banner, whilst Demand, the elven druid, has pulled, despite the departure of her people from the world, has pulled a disparate and long forgotten tribe of mountain dwelling ice elves to her banner and has joined forces with Strike. Meanwhile, we have unfortunately lost our first player character, which is my wife's player character, who was playing a bard. She died after a particularly vicious attack from the dark orc troops of the demented orc shaman. At the time, the character was offered a deal by Hel, the god of death, where she would be allowed to return to the world of the living if she provided a soul to take her place in Hel's halls within 3 days. Unfortunately, the bard Cora was unable to bring herself to send someone else to the afterlife in her place. And as she was on board a boat with one of her kinsmen racing towards the Sapphire Islands, having heard that the Emperor had thrown in his lot with the evil wrongdoers, Hel rose up and claimed her soul, dragging her to the depths. Now, this leaves me in an interesting position for the final session, since obviously it's been quite built up and it is the final sort of push, the final clash between these massive forces with the fate of the main kingdom as the prize. Also, I've got to find some way of bringing my wife in as a new character, but one that isn't outclassed and actually has a part to play in the final events. Luckily, there are a number of NPCs, including the pirate captain who was taking her character to the Sapphire Islands, whom she could play for the final session. But basically, what I've got to do is I'm struggling to think of ways in which this could be presented without seeming anticlimactic. Unfortunately, because of the way the sessions fell, we've had quite a long gap between the 9th and the 10th session. So I really do want it to be a big, momentous, climactic session. However, since it's these massive armies clashing, I'm really struggling to think of a way in which I can do this, since I don't want to draw the action too far away from the characters. At the moment, I'm thinking of having the characters have like a series of objectives they have to achieve to effectively win out in this situation, and then basing the final outcome on the number of objectives they achieve. So just for an example, let's say they've got 10 objectives, 10 missions they have to accomplish. If they only achieve a couple of them, their side's not going to come out too well, whereas if they achieve all of them, they've obviously scored an overwhelming victory. Dungeon World is a great system, and that's what we're using for the game. It is, however, very simple. I don't want to overly complicate the final session, but as I say, I do want it to be a big finale and for the game to go out on a high note. So I was just wondering, and I thought I'd throw this open to anyone out there who's watching the video who cares to comment, or even better, make a video response. If you had a final session where you wanted to have huge armies clashing, but you didn't want to make the game overly complex and a lengthy tactical exercise, what advice would you give me, and how would you go about it? I'm very interested to hear your responses. Thanks very much for listening.